Okay, so um, this one's a case that just seems to never go away.
It really
The
doesn't.
JonBenét Ramsey case,
Yeah.
28 years later,
Yeah.
and it's still captivating.
Definitely.
Um,
Perplexing.
It really just went from like local tragedy to global obsession just
Right.
overnight.
Yeah, like almost immediately.
Yeah.
And it all started the day after Christmas, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado.
Yep.
6-year-old beauty queen, JonBenét Ramsey, was found dead in her family's basement.
And it just instantly put the Ramsey family
Yeah.
and their entire home
Well.
under intense scrutiny.
For sure. So we've got police reports, court documents, books, articles, a mountain of material to sift through for this deep dive.
Yeah.
And our mission is to try and make sense of it all. So separate fact from fiction, explore the various theories,
Right.
and see if we can even gain a deeper understanding of what might have happened to JonBenét.
It's a case with like so many twists and turns, so much conflicting information.
For sure.
It's just easy to get lost.
Easy to get lost, yeah. So let's start at the very beginning
Oh.
with the crime scene itself.
What was the scene like when JonBenét's body was discovered?
So picture this.
Oh.
It's about 1 p.m. on December 26. John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, finds her body
Oh.
in a room in the basement, accessed through a door that was secured with an extra latch. It wasn't a room that the family used frequently.
Oh, okay. And so the state of her body, that's got to be a tough one to...
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is. The autopsy report paints a very disturbing picture. JonBenét's mouth was covered with duct tape. She had a nylon cord around her wrists and neck, and her torso was covered with a blanket.
It does sound like signs of a struggle. Was there anything else that stood out to investigators?
Yes, a couple things. First, the autopsy revealed that JonBenét's death was caused by strangulation and a skull fracture. It was brutal and a very deliberate act. Second, investigators found a garrote near her body. It was a makeshift device fashioned from a piece of nylon cord and the broken handle of a paintbrush.
A paintbrush, yes.
And it gets even stranger.
Okay.
The top part of that paintbrush was found in Patsy Ramsey's art supplies, but the bottom part, the one used in the garrote, was never located.
Wow.
It's one of those small details that adds another layer of mystery to the case.
Okay, so we got a seemingly staged scene of violent death, and now this missing piece of a paintbrush. What else do we need to factor into the equation here?
So before we go any further, we need to talk about the ransom note.
Okay.
It was discovered before JonBenét's body and played a huge role in the initial stages of the investigation.
The ransom note. Yeah, I remember that being a big part of the news coverage at the time.
Oh, it was. This wasn't your typical ransom note.
Okay.
It was incredibly long, 2.5 pages, handwritten, and filled with odd phrases and dramatic flourishes. It demanded $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return, an amount suspiciously close to John Ramsey's Christmas bonus.
Oh, wow. So immediately there's a possible connection to someone who knows the family's finances.
Right.
What else seemed off about this note?
Well, for one, the sheer length of it.
It was unusual. Most ransom notes are short and to the point.
Right.
This one read more like a script from a bad movie.
Wow.
And the language. It was formal, overly dramatic, and included phrases that just didn't seem to fit a typical kidnapping scenario.
Right, right. And wasn't there something about Patsy Ramsey's fingerprints being the only ones found on the note?
That's right. The lack of any other fingerprints, combined with the note's unusual style and tone, led many to believe it was staged, perhaps written by someone trying to mislead investigators.
But I thought a court later ruled that it was unlikely. Patsy Ramsey wrote the note.
They did. A federal court reviewed the handwriting analysis and determined it was highly unlikely that Patsy was the author. But that ruling didn't completely eliminate the suspicion surrounding the note.
Okay, so this is already getting complicated, and we're just getting started. We've got a seemingly staged crime scene, a brutal method of killing, a bizarre ransom note. What other elements were at play here? So there's one more detail we need to address before moving on to the suspects and theories.
Okay.
The pineapple.
The pineapple.
Yes, the pineapple. The autopsy report noted undigested pineapple in JonBenét's stomach, suggesting she ate some shortly before her death. There was also a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table, but both John and Patsy denied any memory of feeding her pineapple that night.
Hold on. So we've got pineapple in her system, a bowl of pineapple in the house, but no one admits to giving it to her.
Oh, yeah.
That's definitely odd.
It is. And to add another layer of confusion,
Okay.
the bowl of pineapple had Patsy Ramsey's fingerprints on it.
Oh, so this keeps getting stranger and stranger. We got the duct tape, the garrote, the ransom note, the pineapple. Like a puzzle with a dozen missing pieces. So where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's time we start looking at the suspects and the various theories that emerged from all of this evidence or lack thereof.
Okay. Yeah, let's unpack that. We'll get into who investigators focused on.
Yep.
And what evidence they used to support their suspicions. In part 2 of our deep dive into the JonBenét Ramsey case.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the JonBenét Ramsey case.
This case is just a perfect example of how, a complex investigation can give rise to multiple, often conflicting theories.
For sure.
And a few cases have generated as much debate and speculation as this one.
Let's start with the theory that was front and center from the very beginning, the family member theory.
Right.
So why did investigators initially focus on JonBenét's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey?
Well, several factors contributed to that early focus. First, there was the lack of forced entry.
Right.
The house seemed secure, suggesting that someone with access, like a family member, was involved.
But we talked about the broken basement window, though, which some, like Detective Lou Smith, believed could have been the intruder's entry point.
Right, but initially the police didn't find evidence to support that.
Okay. Plus, there was the ransom note, its tone, its length, the fact that it was found inside the house.
Right.
All of that seemed to point towards an attempt to stage the scene and misdirect the investigation.
Right. And if someone was staging the scene, wouldn't it make sense for it to be someone familiar with the family?
Right.
Someone who could mimic Patsy's handwriting?
Exactly. Remember, the handwriting analysis came later.
Okay.
At the time, the note seemed like a very strong indicator of possible parental involvement.
So, aside from the lack of forced entry and the ransom note, was there anything else that fueled suspicion towards the Ramseys?
There were a few other things. Some investigators felt the Ramseys weren't fully cooperating.
Okay.
They were hesitant to give detailed interviews. And their decision to hire a high-powered legal team so quickly was viewed with suspicion by some.
It seems that could be a natural reaction from a wealthy family, though, suddenly caught in a media storm. It's important to consider that perspective, too.
Right.
The Ramseys maintained that they were simply trying to protect themselves and their family in a situation that was quickly spiraling out of control.
Okay, so we've got the lack of forced entry, the questionable ransom note, and this perceived lack of cooperation. Was there anything else specific that pointed towards the parents?
So one element that gained a lot of attention, particularly in the media, was JonBenét's bedwetting.
Okay.
The theory was that Patsy might have reacted violently to a bedwetting incident leading to JonBenét's death and the subsequent cover-up.
But didn't Burke, JonBenét's brother, later refute that theory?
He did. In a 2016 interview, Burke stated that bedwetting was not a major issue in their family and that they never faced harsh punishments for it. And a child psychologist who had evaluated the family also concluded that there were no signs of abuse or dysfunction.
So that seems to discredit the bedwetting theory?
Yeah.
It highlights how quickly speculation can take hold in a high-profile case, even without strong evidence. What about JonBenét's brother, Burke? Was he ever seriously considered a suspect?
He was questioned, of course.
Yeah.
But he was only 9 years old at the time.
Right.
His interviews with investigators raised some concerns due to what some perceived as unusual behavior.
Right.
But ultimately, there wasn't enough evidence to consider him a prime suspect.
Didn't the grand jury vote to indict John and Patsy Ramsey, though?
That's right. In 1999, after hearing months of testimony, a grand jury did vote to indict the Ramseys on charges of child abuse, resulting in death.
Right.
But there's a very important caveat here.
Okay.
The district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, refused to sign the indictment.
He refused to sign. Why?
Hunter publicly stated that he didn't believe there was sufficient evidence to secure a conviction.
Yep.
He felt the evidence against the Ramseys, while suggestive didn't meet the high burden of proof required for a criminal trial.
So that's a pretty bold move to go against a grand jury's decision.
It was, and it added another layer of complexity to an already convoluted case.
So what happened after the DA's refusal to prosecute?
The case essentially went cold for several years. The grand jury's decision to indict remained a secret until 2013, when those documents were finally unsealed.
Oh, wow.
It reignited the debate about the Ramseys' involvement.
Right.
And fueled speculation once again.
So even though they were never formally charged, the shadow of suspicion never really lifted.
Not entirely. And this is where we see a clear division in the theories surrounding the case. On one side, you have the family member theory, which we've been discussing. And on the other, you have the intruder theory.
Right, the idea that someone broke into the house and committed the crime. So what evidence do proponents of the intruder theory point to?
Well, they often start with the broken basement window. They argue that it's a plausible entry point, especially if the intruder was familiar with the layout of the house and knew that window was often left unlocked.
And the brutality of the crime. Some argue that doesn't fit the profile of a parent killing their own child.
That's another key argument. The use of the groat, the duct tape, the violence of the attack. Some experts believe it points towards someone with a more sinister motive, someone outside the family.
And there's the DNA evidence, right?
Exactly. That's a crucial piece of the puzzle for proponents of the intruder theory.
Right.
This DNA, which was found on JonBenét's clothing and under her fingernails, has never been identified. But we know it belonged to an unknown male.
So the intruder theory hinges on this. Unknown DNA sample. The possibility of entry through the basement window. And the argument that the crime was too brutal to be committed by a parent. What are the counter-arguments to this theory?
Well, despite the presence of this unknown DNA, no one has been able to match it to any individual. Extensive searches through DNA databases have come up empty.
So it's a tantalizing clue, but it hasn't led to any concrete answers. What about the ransom note? If there was an intruder, why go to the trouble of writing such a long and elaborate note? Wouldn't a seasoned criminal be more likely to get in and out quickly?
That's a valid point. The ransom note remains a sticking point for the intruder theory. Some argue that it was meant to throw off investigators to make the crime look like a kidnapping gone wrong. But the motive behind such a carefully crafted note remains unclear.
So we got two main theories, each with its strengths and weaknesses. Its supporters and detractors. So where do we go from here?
I think it's time we delve into some of the more intriguing leads and potential suspects who emerged during the investigation. These are the twists and turns that kept the case in the headlines and added fuel to the media frenzy.
Okay, let's explore those next. We'll talk about the various individuals who came under scrutiny and why their involvement was ultimately ruled out or not. In part 3 of our deep dive into the JonBenét Ramsey case. Welcome back to our deep dive into the JonBenét Ramsey case.
We've covered the main theories, but this case, man, it's full of intriguing side roads and potential suspects who were investigated and, for one reason or another, ultimately dismissed.
Yeah, I'm ready for a detour. Who were some of these other individuals who caught the attention of investigators?
Well, one was a neighbor named Bill McReynolds. He and his wife had a rather unsettling connection to JonBenét.
Unsettling? In what way?
Well, Bill McReynolds had played Santa Claus for the Ramseys a few times, including the Christmas before JonBenét's death.
Okay, yeah. I could see how that would raise some eyebrows.
Right. Given the timing.
Yeah.
What else made him a person of interest was that he'd written a play that contained some disturbing themes.
Oh, wow.
Which seemed to echo elements of the crime. And he made some odd comments about JonBenét after her death. That just seemed off.
So they investigated him. Did they find any concrete evidence connecting him to the murder?
No, they didn't. It turned out to be a dead end. Despite the unsettling circumstances, there was nothing solid linking him to the crime scene or to JonBenét's death.
Okay, so Santa's off the list. Who else did they look into?
Another person of interest was a local reporter named Chris Wolf. He had actually covered the Ramsey case for a newspaper. And his girlfriend at the time contacted the police suggesting he might be involved.
A reporter covering the case? That's a pretty wild twist. Why did his girlfriend suspect him?
She claimed he acted strangely after JonBenét's murder and that some of his writings seemed to mirror details of the crime. It's worth noting that Wolf vehemently denied these accusations.
Sounds a bit like the McReynolds situation. Did anything come of her suspicions?
Not really. The police did investigate Wolf, but they couldn't find any concrete evidence to support his girlfriend's claims. It was another dead end. Wolf later sued the Ramseys for defamation, arguing that their public statements identifying him as a suspect had damaged his career and reputation.
So we've got a neighbor who played Santa Claus and a reporter covering the case.
Oh,
Both cleared after investigation.
Right.
Anyone else on this list of potential suspects?
There was the Ramsey family's housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh.
Okay.
Her name appeared in a peculiar way in the ransom note, and hence was written as a hence. And investigators thought that the A might be connected to Hoffman Pugh's habit of signing her name as Lindap.
Oh, so a possible handwriting link.
Right.
Did they find any other evidence to suggest her involvement?
No, they didn't. She maintained her innocence throughout the investigation and cooperated fully with the police. There just wasn't enough there to consider her a serious suspect.
Okay, so the housekeeper, the reporter, Santa, all cleared. Any other names we should consider?
One more stands out. Michael Helgoth.
Michael Helgoth. Who was he?
Helgoth was a local man with a criminal record who died not long after JonBenét's murder, which, of course, fueled speculation about his potential involvement.
Died how? Was there anything suspicious about his death?
Officially, his death was ruled a suicide.
Okay.
But there were some, including Lou Smith, the detective who championed the intruder theory, who felt that Helgoth's death deserved a closer look.
What made Smith think Helgoth might be connected to JonBenet?
He had received information from a source claiming that Helgoth had bragged about doing something big in Boulder around the time of JonBenét's death.
Okay, something big. That's pretty vague.
It is.
Was there anything more substantial linking him to the crime scene?
Some people claim that Helgoth owned boots that were similar to a footprint found near the house. But again, it was all circumstantial. Nothing concrete ever emerged.
Another dead end. Seems like a lot of these leads were intriguing, that ultimately fizzled out. But there was one suspect who really threw the investigation for a loop.
Okay.
John Mark Carr.
Yes. John Mark Carr. His story is just a classic example of how false confessions can just derail even the most carefully conducted investigations.
Remind us, who was Carr and how did he enter the picture?
So 10 years after JonBenét's murder, Carr, an elementary school teacher living in Thailand at the time, confessed to killing her.
A confession a decade later? Yeah. That's a pretty big development. What made his confession so compelling to investigators?
Well, initially it seemed like he had inside knowledge. He claimed he was with JonBenet when she died, and he offered up details that seemed to match the evidence.
Okay.
Plus, he had a documented fascination with JonBenet and the world of child beauty pageants.
So they thought they finally had their man.
It seemed that way for a while. Carr was extradited to the U.S., but it quickly became clear that his confession was bogus.
What happened? Did his story fall apart?
It did. The more he talked, the more inconsistencies emerged. His timeline didn't add up. Details of his account changed constantly. And some of his claims directly contradicted the physical evidence.
And of course, there was the DNA.
Right. Carr's DNA was tested against the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, and there was no match. The case against him crumbled.
So he confessed to a crime he didn't commit. Any theories on why someone would do that?
There's been a lot of speculation about Carr's motives. Some psychologists believe he was seeking attention. Others suggest he may have suffered from a delusional disorder that led him to believe he was involved.
It just goes to show how even a seemingly solid confession needs to be scrutinized and corroborated with hard evidence.
Absolutely. The Carr saga threw the investigation into a tailspin for a while. But in the end, it just added another layer of complexity to an already baffling case.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've examined the crime scene, explored the two main theories, and delved into some of the more prominent side stories and suspects. But the central question still remains, who killed JonBenét Ramsey?
And that's a question that may never have a definitive answer. Despite years of investigation, countless hours of analysis, and advances in DNA technology, the case remains unsolved.
It's a case that highlights the limitations of forensic science, the power of media narratives, and the human need to make sense of the senseless.
It also underscores the importance of remaining objective, of carefully considering all possibilities, and of resisting the temptation to jump to conclusions based on incomplete information.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, a deeper understanding of the complexities of the JonBenét Ramsey case.
It's a case that continues to fascinate, frustrate, and challenge our assumptions about crime and justice.
And we encourage you to explore the additional resources we've provided if you're interested in learning more. And remember, sometimes the most enduring mysteries are the ones that force us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the enduring power of the unknown.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the JonBenét Ramsey case.